What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of SWAC Talk Show. We cover the SWAC inside and out. I am your tour guide around the SWAC Seawell, and we are continuing our season recaps. We just putting a bow on the 2024 season, and today we're going to talk about Florida A&M Rattlers. Um, Pretty interesting season they had. No matter how you look at it, it was interesting to say the least. But before we do that, y'all make sure y'all hit those socials: Facebook is Swag Talk, Instagram Swag Talk, Twitter Swag Talk 76. Like the video, comment, and share your thoughts on this recap. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And I will have my 2024 FAMU preview in the description. The link will be in the description, and it will also be on a tab on the end screen. So if you want to go back and check out the preview and see basically how wrong I was, have at it. So let's go ahead and jump into this. As we all know, the Rattlers came into this season as the defending SWAC champs and Celebration Bowl champs. Um, New coach, Coach James Cozy, a lot of new faces on both sides of the ball. Uh, but there was optimism. I was one of the people who really thought this team would win the East again. I thought they may have some ups and downs, but I did think that they could get it done. And they started off in that fashion. Winning their first two games against Norfolk State, and eventual Celebration Bowl participant, South Carolina State. They won those games both pretty close. They beat Norfolk 24-23, and they beat South Carolina State 22-18. But those were two wins. And you're sitting at 2-0 going into a two-game stretch against FBS opponents with a bye week in between the two games. But two FBS opponents, Miami, which is a Power Four team and a team who honestly had a really good offense this season, and Troy, a team who wasn't doing as well. And that game was honestly a lot closer than that 34-12 score. It ended up, you just could not. They could not get the ball in the end zone, but they seemed like they were kind of finding their form as they headed into a 28-13 victory over Alabama State, which was a very key victory for them because I actually had them losing to Alabama State. Um, and so, I thought that would be a game that they could drop. They ultimately ended up winning it, and that put them in a odd situation because actually before that game, they had a game scheduled with Alabama A&M that was rescheduled because of a hurricane, which moved that game back to the end of the season on Black Friday. So they beat Bama State, and then after another bye week, you go into Jackson State and lose 35-21. JSU had a huge fourth quarter run and got that victory there. So this team was sitting at 3-3, which honestly is not that's not really bad. I mean, 3-3, and you were 1-1 in conference. You lost to one of the teams who could have been predicted in the preseason to beat you. So, it's not like they got upset by anybody. But they weren't really looking like a lot of people thought they should be looking or felt like they should be looking. So they kind of was shaky, but I thought the Southern game was a game where they, at least defensively, I thought they really kind of started to find their form. Um, they won that game 24-6. And they seem like at that point bouncing back from the JSU loss with a key victory at home. I think it looked like they were kind of getting themselves in the best position. And then they played Texas Southern for homecoming, and they win that game in a blowout fashion, 52-28. And at that point, it really looks like this team is starting to be that FAMU team. And at that point, a lot of us were talking three-way ties for the East. FAMU needs a three-way tie to win the division. They were, they only had one loss. They were 3-1, and you're looking at the schedule. You have a couple. You have 3 games, basically 3 games to close out the season against teams that you're gonna beat, and then an Alabama A&M game that's kind of iffy, not iffy in terms of wins and losses, but a little bit tougher opponent in a situation that's kind of unorthodox. But the strange thing happened on the way to the end of the season. They lose to Prairie View on the road, uh, 31-12. Prairie View basically controlled this game all the way through, got the win. And, the following week, the whole house of cards fell down, losing the Valley 24-21. To me, that was like sometimes, that was like as bad as it can get this season. And now there's a lot of, really a lot of doubts going around about this team. Can they even win their last 2 games? Are they going to win another game? What kind of changes they're going to make? X, Y, and Z. Um, and they had the battle in the Florida Classic. They had the battle, but they won at 41-38, and then they beat Alabama and them 28-20 to close out the season, giving them a 7-5 record, 5-3 in conference. They did close out the season on a 2-game winning streak. They went 4-1 at home, had a long home winning streak snapped by Valley. They were only 1-4 on the road, and 2-0 in neutral sites. But just this was not the season that really anybody other than a few people expected. Um, I had this team going 9-3 and 7-1 in conference. I had them at a ceiling of 10-2 because those 2 FBS games, I didn't really feel like they were in position to win either one of them. So I had them going 10-2. The floor I set for them was 7-5, and that's exactly where they ended up. And when I set that floor, I set that with the understanding that this would be almost catastrophic for them to finish at 7-5. Um, and it basically it was. I mean, when you lose to Valley and a Prairie View team that's not consistent, and and both of those teams ultimately at the end of the season fired their coach. Um, that's as rough as it can get. And it's like that's when you really have to dig deep, and find out who's in it to win it and who's here because they wanted to hop on the train because it was already rolling. So they made some changes in the offensive staff, changed play callers, and that helped them close out the season because they ran the ball better. And so my first thought that I had listed on my preview was new head man, growing pains. And I mean, when you look at it, yes, this team had a lot of growing pains. A lot of things that this team um, typically did well. Um, they really didn't do as well. I mean, we'll start with the defense. This was a defense last season that gave up 15 points per game, 15.2. Um, they led the league in total defense at 261 yards per game. They allowed 4.2 yards per play. They were first in rushing defense, only allowing 95 yards per game and 2.9 yards per carry. They were first in passing defense at 165 yards per game. They had 17 interceptions, allowing 14 touchdowns. And they also led the league registering 37 sacks. Now that is boosted by a couple extra games, but those are still very, very strong numbers. Um, and the defense this season got off to a rough start. They ultimately ended up allowing 27 points per game, which was fifth in the conference. They finished fifth in total defense at 349 yards per game, allowing 5.8 yards per play. So that per play average jumped up huge. And they were susceptible to big plays, especially on the ground. Um, and they finished seventh in rushing defense. So they dropped from first to seventh in the span of a year, giving up 167 yards per game and 4.5 yards per carry. Now, when you look at kind of what they did, what the opponents did on the ground in the early portion of the season, Norfolk State opened up the season rushing for 227 yards on the Rattlers. South Carolina State 154, Miami 222, 225, Troy 212, Bama State 211, Jackson State 245. Southern ran for 122. That was the best rushing. That was the best rushing effort that they had, basically up until that point. TSU ran for 111, so that was they stopped it there. 151 for Prairie View, 80 for Valley, 183 for Bethune, and then 75 for Alabama A&M. So as you can see, they gave up five. They had five of their first four games. They gave up over 200 yards on the ground, and this was a defense that did not allow anything on the ground last season. So, giving that up, they gave up an 82-yard run against Norfolk State. They had a 67-yarder against them by Bama State, a 54-yarder by Jackson State. So they gave up some explosive runs, and they just never, it seemed like that was what really kind of had this defense on their heels for the most part all season. And when you can't stop the run, it makes your team look worse than a team that can't stop the pass, because running the ball is like just a physical thing, and it's like you can't match a team's physicality. They finished sixth in passing defense at 182 yards per game. They only had 9 interceptions on the season, and they went a long time with a low number of interceptions. Um, and they just did not they just were not able to make a lot of things, cause a lot of havoc like they had been doing. They finished the season with 21 sacks, which was ninth in the league. Uh, they just had a tough go of it. I mean, um, they only forced 13 turnovers on the season. They only had 9 interceptions and 4 fumble recoveries. So they didn't even turn teams over like they typically would. And just in comparison, in 23, excuse me, they finished with 17 interceptions, and they finished with six fumble recoveries. So that's 23 takeaways. They had 10 fewer this season. And when you can't turn the ball, when you can't turn teams over, and you can't stop them on the ground, you're gonna have a tough go of it. Now, they also they did lead the league last season in third down percentage at 27% on third down. This season, they finished with a conversion rate of 36.5%. So that dropped pretty huge. And so when you can't turn teams over and you can't get off the field, it makes it tough for you as a defense. It makes it tough for you to kind of make some things happen. And when you look at um, their last two losses, which were basically their toughest losses, they gave up 151 on the ground in Prairie View and 193 through the air. They gave up 90 on the ground in the Valley and 251 through the air. And that Valley game, Valley jumped out 24-7. And fam, they could not overtake them. Valley didn't score in the second half. They just could not overtake them. And that's something that you never expect. That was typically, even last season, if they fell behind by that score, they would have probably came back and won that game like 31-21. They had those kind of games where they started off slow, but then they would lock in on defense, and then the offense would make the plays that needed to be made, and that would get them on track. But this season, it just didn't go that way. And a big portion of why this team didn't really look as great as they could was because I think offensively they were so pass happy that it almost to a detriment. The offense, started clicking late once they made some changes, but they did not run the ball well at all, especially for a team that I felt like had some really solid ball carriers. Um, and that's another growing pain. You have changing the play calling. You have different personnel on offense, and this team, came into the season with a really good offensive line, and I feel like that was one of the strengths of this team coming into the season, and they finished allowing 26 sacks this season. Uh, Last season they finished with 16, so they allowed 10 more sacks this season. Some of that, it was a new guy at quarterback, not necessarily a lack of talent or anything like that, but just not being new to the system and trying to make things happen, and getting sacked at times. But um, that was another one of my thoughts was quarterback. Can a quarterback emerge? That was Jimmy Maritovic, Daniel Richardson. A battle going into the season. I thought Richardson would come out ahead, and he did. And he had a great season. 23, 231 of 330, 70% completion rate. That's tremendous. 2,652 yards, 23 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Those are tremendous numbers. I mean, those are league leading numbers. Um, and that through no fault of that guy behind center, the offense was capable of exploding, but they never really got that boost under their belt. Um, and this was this was a QB that led the league in yards per game. Um, he led the league in touchdowns. He led the league in total in yardage. He led in completion percentage. And out of most of the starting quarterbacks, he had a decent interception rate. And so you're looking at an offense that when you see them with that passing attack, which finished second in the league at 238 yards per game, 24 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, and they averaged 7.6 yards per pass, which was second in the league behind Jackson State, at a crazy 8.6 yards per catch. Um, this was an offense that you kind of felt like could be a really high flying offense. They finished the season averaging 24 points per game. Uh, and kind of looking at how they scoring 24 first game, 22 second game, 9 and 12 against your FBS opponents, 28 against Bama State, 21 against Jackson State, 24 against Southern. One of those touchdowns they scored was a punt return in that game. So offense had 2 touchdowns in that game. 52 against TSU, which was by far the highest in the season for them. 12 against Prairie View, 21 against Valley, 41 against Bethune, and 28 against Alabama A&M. So this offense only scored more than 30 points twice. And that's something that is that's tough when you can't score consistently, and you can't be counted on to put nice huge totals on the board. It makes it tough, especially when your defense is kind of having a rough go of it. They finished third in total offense, primarily behind that passing attack, at 383 yards per game and 6.2 yards per play. Again, only second to Jackson State in that category. And the issue with this team, and it got better at the end of the season, was the rushing attack. They finished seventh in the league at 145 yards per game and 8 touchdowns, and they didn't score their first rushing touchdown till late in the season. But that 145 is honestly a little deceiving, because when you look at what this team did on the ground, for the most part, 117 yards against Norfolk State, 133 against South Carolina State, 52 against Miami, 55 against Troy, 112 against Bama State, 63 against Jackson State, 126 against Southern, 236 against Texas Southern, which was an honest explosion for them. 140 against Valley, 172. 140 against Prairie View, 172 against Valley, 305 against Bethune Cookman, and 232 against Alabama A&M. And that's when that's when their offense kind of took a turn. They ran the ball 47 times against Bethune-Cookman and 36 against Alabama A&M. They had three other games where they ran the ball for over. They ran the ball 30 times or more. Um, and for the most, other than that, you had a lot of games in the mid to low 20s in attempts. And offensively, this team, like I said, they just did not. They did not run the ball a lot. It wasn't the Russian attack wasn't productive or explosive because of lack of talent. It was because they only ran the ball 367 times. That was the fewest in the conference. They were one of only two teams in the conference that ran the ball less than 400 times. Now they were efficient when they ran the ball because they averaged 4.7 yards per carry, which was third in the league. So even with those few amount of carries, they were very productive. And I felt like they had three really good backs to carry the load for them. Um, and when you look at guys like Thad Franklin, who finished with 653 yards and five touchdowns, he averaged 5.4 yards per carry. Bo Somerset had 497 yards on the season, two touchdowns, 7.5 yards per carry. And Kelvin Dean had 482 yards on the season and one touchdown, and he averaged 5.1 yards per carry. And then, so those are three guys all averaging over 5 yards a carry. There's no reason why this team shouldn't have ran the ball. Shouldn't have ran the ball for 175 yards a game easily. They really had really good backs. They just did not. They chose to put one arm behind their back and just pass the ball, which was a good thing. The passing attack was great. I'm not gonna say that the passing attack didn't carry the load, but when you got guys that can run the ball like those guys, you feed those guys, and that gets you over the hump against Valley. That gets you over the hump against Prairie View, especially the Prairie View game when Daniel Richardson went down. Now you have a young quarterback out there. You want to kind of feed them and let those guys eat and help settle the team down. Uh, my other thought was, are they going to be in a battle for the East? And obviously, I thought they would come out on top because I picked them to win the East. And up until the later portion of the season, like I said, up until November 2nd, this team was in the mix for the division, even with the run defense being the way it was, the offense not being as explosive as it could be, you know, the ups and downs. They only had one conference loss at that point, and they were sitting at 3-1 with, like I said, but basically four winnable games. So a lot of people, me included, felt like they would run the table in those last four games and finish 7-1. Um, and if something happened with Jackson State and Bama State, they would be in the mix for that East Division title. But obviously things didn't go that way, so they finished second in the division by 2 games. Well, excuse me, by 3 games. So they, at the end of by the end of November, they really had no chance to win it. Those 2 games really knocked them out the race. So um, they were in the battle for the East for a long stretch of the season. Then the bottom fell out. So um, that's one thought that I didn't really have correctly. Um, I said they needed a strong early start, especially because having those two FBS games back to back, and what I was considering an early start is all your September games. Um, your first 5 games of the season were going to be two MEAC opponents, two FBS opponents, and a SWAC opponent. Well, your SWAC opponent game got postponed, so you had two FBS games, two MEAC games, and you went 2-2 in that stretch, which was what I kind of figured. If they went worse than 2-2, then I really thought that would be one of the reasons why they would hit that 75 mark if they did not open up the season with 2 wins. They needed those 2 wins, especially with those two FBS games behind them. So they did start strong in terms of record. They didn't necessarily start strong in terms of actual play on the field. They look shaky at times, and then other times they look like they would be that team to kind of be a wrecking ball. They just couldn't really put it all in one. and that that's what was the microcosm of the season, and that's the frustration of the season. If if you're a FAMU fan, um, the opportunity was there. Things were laid out for you, but you had football's a strange game sometimes. Um, I said they needed to win the turnover battle. They finished last season at a +5. Like I said, this season they had 13. They had 13 takeaways this season. They had 8 fumbles. I mean, they had 8 interceptions this season that they threw, and they fumbled the ball. They lost, and they lost 13 fumbles, so they finished a -8 in the turnover margin. And so, obviously, when you turn the ball over a ton of times, um, that's gonna hurt you. There's really no other way around it. When you turn the ball over multiple times in a game, it really hurts you. And a lot of those turnovers, especially early in the season, with some ill-advised throws, trying to make some things happen. And like I said, this team lost 20. This team lost 13 fumbles, so they had quite a bit of butterfingers, to kind of put it mildly. They had 19 total fumbles. They lost 13, so they did fumble the ball a lot, and they were unable to get the majority of them back. When you look at what they did in those two losses that were very unexpected, they had 2 interceptions against Prairie View and 1 fumble. So they turned the ball over 3 times in that game, and they forced one because they had an interception. So that's 3 turnovers to 1. You lose the turnover battle in that game against Valley. You turn the ball over, no interceptions thrown, and you didn't fumble the ball either. So there were no turnovers. Excuse me, I'm looking at the wrong side. No interceptions for the Rattlers in that game, but they did fumble the ball 3 times and lost all 3. So you lose that turnover battle, um, 0-3. So that that can those are things that can really put you in a bad spot. And even when you kind of look at the JSU game, I'm just looking at their SWAC losses, which were all their FCS losses. Um, Turnovers were key in all these games against Jackson State. They turned the ball over once through an interception, and they fumbled the ball 3 times and lost 2. So in those 3 losses, they turned the ball over 9 times. They took the ball away from their opponents. Let's see, they had 1 interception against Prairie View, no 1 turnover against Prairie View, none against Valley. They had an interception against Jackson State, and they did have 3 fumbles recovered. So they actually won the turnover battle against Jackson State, but they still finished those 3 losses in conference, losing the turnover battle 9-4. So they finished a -5 in their 3 losses. So when you turn the ball over like that, even if your offense is playing okay, your defense is playing okay, turnovers, they come at, especially when they come at bad times. It can really shake things up and make it tough for you. So they didn't win the turnover battle in those important games, and that was a huge reason why this team lost those games. Um, I said they needed to avoid the rat poison, and if you know that's saying, basically it's just not buying into or listening to um, all the outside noise. And it's tough to say if that happened, because this team never really got off to a super strong start in terms of performance. So I don't really feel like they were hearing so much that they were this and that. But sometimes when guys are new on a team that has a lot of success, and they have a lot of openings, so there's not as many returning guys on that team. You have guys who kind of feel like sometimes maybe you can roll them helmets out and just win. That logo gets you that dub. Sometimes new guys feel like that when they coming into something that's already established. And FAMU had been very solid in the sweat. They had only lost to Jackson State in their previous 3 seasons. So they're there just really wasn't any, any well, they lost that two of the previous 3 seasons. There really wasn't any, any reason for guys to feel like, like they had it made. But sometimes that can happen. A new coach, new guys. Sometimes you kind of have those ups and downs, and so I think that's what made the season even look even worse to people, is that this was a team that was coming off of a Celebration Bowl, was coming off of a dominant run through the conference. And, it's not that they lost the games, it's really who they lost those games to. And that's what makes it look worse. If they lost to Bama State and Jackson State, um, it would look different. Um, Preseason, losing to Prairie View, I didn't think it really would happen, but I thought Prairie View was going to be a solid team in the conference. I thought they would be a team who challenged for the West. So preseason, if you pick that game against FAMU for Prairie View to win it, I wouldn't look at you that crazy. I would look at you crazy, but not that crazy. Valley, there's no way, no how, nobody other than those guys with the Delta Devils on their helmets even felt like they had a chance in that game, even coming off of a Prairie View loss. Now, some people at that point, well, if you're not a FAMU fan, you might have felt like, oh, they right because they lost to Prairie View, they dropped their game in the Valley, but I still feel like they bounced back from that game, and they didn't. So that, those are the things that can kind of be considered as rat poison, because this team just couldn't, they just had a lot of adversity that came up that was in some ways was self-inflicted, and so they just didn't have that performance that a lot of us thought. And so now that they, I want to say now that they hit that low point, which I think is the low point. I don't think they're gonna get any lower than this. They can start to work their way back up and get back to where they think and feel that they should be. Um, and that's just, everything else about the season is kind of what it is. But those few factors are the reason why this team finished where they were. And I really, you can if and football all day long. If this don't happen, then this can happen. But they just had a unrecent FAMU season. Now you take this exact same season and put it on another team, we probably talking about, oh, this was a really solid season. Even losing the Valley for some teams is not the death knell, but that's what it was. And so it was a season of missed opportunities, a season of frustration, a season that had some bright spots and some dark spots, and all of that, when you look at it that way, all of that is what adds up to a 7-5 record. Like I always like to say, when you beat the teams you're supposed to and you lose to the team that you're supposed to lose to, or that you're underdog against, you finish 6-6. So most times you're not gonna lose to many teams that you were supposed to beat, but sometimes it happens, and when it happens, there's not enough games to kind of get that out from under you. And so they finished strong and they started strong, but the middle was a mixed bag. And so that's why this team finished 7-5. So with that being said, man, I'm your tour guide around the SWAC. See, well, signing out, and I will catch y'all on the rebound. Peace.